สวัสดีค่ะ Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Welcome to the regional plenary session on Southeast Asia. We are pleased to inform you of some of this information that would talk about today the focus on addressing malnutrition in all its forms, actions guided by data, inspired by community. Over the years, ASEAN has been experiencing rapid economic development and social transition. With that come changes rapidly also in diet, lifestyle, and the malnutrition problem in this region is getting more multiple and complex. We will explore this in two ways of the format. First, we want to reflect upon what happens in the past until right now. So the lead presentations from the three speakers will shed light on the overview of the burden. How can we use the data to inform and guide action, particularly from policy and program? And then last, we will explore what community-based actions are required to address this problem. The presentation of the three key speakers has been recorded on demand, so you can access the full presentation. For this session, each speaker will provide 5 minutes highlight of their talk. Following that, we will go into a panel. And the panel today, 4 of them, will take us from the present time into the future. When we ask the question of what needs to change in ASEAN in order to be able to cope with the challenge. From the panel, we will open up the floor for question and answer. So you're welcome to write your question and send it to us in your chat box. Please identify which speaker you are directing your question to. So without further delay, I would like to start the session. It is a pleasure for me to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Julia Wati Antoro will be the first speaker, and she's the technical lead of in nutrition from World Health Organization Regional Office for the Western Pacific. This is a presentation that Julia and Dr. Angela Da Silva from WHO Zero has worked together. So, Julia, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Amorn. It's good? Looks good? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Amorn. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. So I'm Julia Wati Undoro. I will present the short presentation, which is 5-minute summary of the long presentation that you will find in the Micronutrient Connect platform. The title will be like Southeast Asia in Transition, a double burden of malnutrition. So as you may have seen in my longer presentation, it shows very clearly that all countries in the ASEAN region face double burden of malnutrition. There has been quite some considerable progress in the reduction of undernutrition in some countries, but the rate is way too slow and also too inconsistently. The level of undernutrition in some countries are still very high. And then at the same time, as you see in this slide and also in the long slide, overweight and obesity is rising at an alarming rate in almost all countries in the region. Indeed, as Dr. Emon said, ASEAN region has enjoyed rapid economic growth, urbanization, and globalization. But at the same time, this development has changed the food environment as well as changes the dietary pattern, which, changing from the traditional food to become processed food, which is high in fat, sugar, and salt. And this unhealthy diet has been linked with the high risk of obesity, overweight, as well as NCD. We actually face a new reality here. We can no longer categorize like, low income country is undernourished or high income country, the only concern of obesity. Almost all country, they face double burden of malnutrition. So indeed, the region is off track toward the global target. Based on the data that we have, 7 countries in ASEAN actually on course to meet one of the global target on maternal, infant, and child nutrition and diet-related non-communicable disease. However, there is no country in the region that is on course to meet all the target. And as you see in this slide, no country is on track to achieve adult obesity. No country is on track to achieve the anemia target, nor of the childhood wasting. There is also an issue here that I would like to raise. There is a data gaps in various countries. You see the gray bar there? There is no data in the countries. As we learned from our previous MDG, it is indeed important to have a sufficient quality data to be able to assess the progress and to see whether the achievement of the countries. So the next presenter will show you more on the important role of the data in the program. So indeed, no, I still have one more. Sorry. So indeed, yes, yes. Oh, do I have to share it again? Okay. Yes. PowerPoint slideshow. Yeah. Yes. So indeed, there is a need to have an action to accelerate and strengthen the multi-sectoral program as well as like to scale up the proven cost-effective intervention, which is both nutrition specific as well as nutrition sensitive, which we will hear more from our panel today. There is also a potential of double duty action, which our analysis show that actually policy that addressing undernutrition often not include overweight and obesity, nor do the policy that addressing overweight and obesity that is reflecting challenges of undernutrition. And action to address undernutrition and addressing obesity are typically managed by spirit program, governance structure, as well as funding stream. We need to break this silo, and double duty action might be one of the possible alternative in which like it's not necessarily a new action. They are often action that are already used to address the single form of malnutrition, but with the potential to address both undernutrition as well as obesity simultaneously. The example of community-based growth monitoring and promotion will be, we will hear more from the next presenter, which is like this is like one of the possible opportunity to address both using one single intervention. And commitment and resources are indeed very important to tackling all form of malnutrition. While we see in our region that the spending of nutrition has increased in some of the countries, and nutrition is indeed a national agenda in almost all of the countries in ASEAN, but the data show that the current commitment of the government or spending in terms of addressing malnutrition remain generally low. It doesn't match with the need. So indeed, increasing financing on nutrition is very important to deliver the result. And our colleague from the World Bank in the panelists might talk further on this issue. And last but not least, there is indeed a need to improve and invest in the data both the quality as well as the quantity of the frequency of collection, and most importantly, also the capacity to use this data. Thank you.
I could
Thank you
not
very much.
start.
Um,
Can you
yeah,
answer?
let
Cannot.
me introduce you, Rina, for a little bit, just before you start. Okay. Thank, thank you very much, Julia. And it's a pleasure to introduce the next speaker. So Julia has already paved the way to this next one. Dr. Rina Agustina, head of uh, in Human Nutrition Research Center, Emory, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Indonesia. She will talk to us about how data has been used and using a case studies in this region. Rina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor M1. Greetings for everyone. I'm Dr. Rina Agustina. I'm honored to present the evidence-guided action for maternal nutrition, which highlight the excerpt from three countries, Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. This is actually the works of the Mahidol University, supported by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Here we know that Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand address multiple burden of malnutrition, as mentioned by previous speaker, and especially focusing on the policy related to early life nutrition. This country also present a periodic national nutrition, food health, and survey. However, on that survey, few nutrition indicator on maternal nutrition status are available, and sometimes an even more bias and error associated with low coverage of also the major concern. And most importantly, maternal dietary intakes are scarce. So therefore, we initiate to construct the evidence-based data system and systematically compile, analyze, and also model diet and nutritional status data and describe data application for policy formulation. We actually have three countries with Indonesia as the adolescent nutrition as a focus. And I would actually present the dietary intake only, not for nutritional status, as you can find in our long version of the presentation. Here we know that the adolescent nutrition in Indonesia showed a highest frequency of consuming unhealthy eating behavior, including sweet, salty, compared to the other age group. And the younger age even consume more sweetened one, about more than half of them, of 53%, and 11% eat instant noodle at the daily basis. We know that also 65% of them skip their breakfast, and almost 96% having insufficient intake of fruit and vegetable. So what happened in the Philippines of the data from National Nutrition Survey shows that less than 20% of the pregnant women and also the lactating mother consume adequate energy intake, and protein and also iron intake barely changed over the past 2 decades. And we see that also many of the micronutrient intake, especially iron decreasing trend on the proportion of meeting the ER over the 10 years period. And on the Thailand, dietary intake of women of reproductive age was used as the surrogate to those consumed by pregnant and lactating mother because it's not present in their national survey. And it shows that the energy intake and protein are adequate, but not for calcium and iron intake. So what we can learn from this data, from this experiment, from this data, the countries have a high level commitment related to nutrition for the first 1,000 days of life, including the adolescents. So there's a presidential and ministerial decree for balanced nutrition, for example, IFA program for adolescent girls, health nutrition of mother and child act, and also a miracle of 1,000 days in Thailand for national-wide implementation. We actually summarize also the policy based their decision on evidence from multiple national survey. Like for example, Philippines construct special policy based on evidence like micronutrient supplementation, antenatal care, and 1,000 days law. The analysis of evidence-based decision-making process also indicates a need for data that leads to solution, and guided program implementation. Therefore, providing health information system platform that can be reached by researcher and other stakeholders and linked with universal health coverage system are important. Here a summary from the three countries, how they use the data highlight problem. Like for example, Indonesia use multiple sources, and also the Philippines and Thailand utilize data nutrition over the years, especially for Philippines. And Thailand also used the neglected challenge as the highlighted problem. The framing issue also shows in Indonesia on second window of opportunity, while Philippines and Thailand look at more on the stunting and non-communicable disease. We see here examining the policy, the Indonesia as well as Philippines and Thailand, they have a quite a good environment to construct the policy which support adolescent nutrition for Indonesia, the supportive for 1,000 days program in Philippines, and also Miracle, the first 1,000 days in Thailand. In Thailand, the new framing of maternal nutrition as central to both child outcomes and also future NCDs are highlighted. And in Indonesia, issue of multiple ways of reaching adolescents are actually very important, and there needs more work in different area that more programmatic. So the way forward, especially for maternal intake, maybe can be found also for other potential nutritional status, which found in my presentation. The first one that the existing framework data gathering in most countries is based on repeated year point or periodic survey, this is insufficient to keep up with the rapid changes in dietary preference and product on the market, especially in rapid change of urban environment and for adolescent. Second, investment in robust integrated digital health information system for frontline health worker will be crucial for impact and sustainability. The third, with better real-time data flows as described in the point 1 and 2, we could also link gaps with tailored intervention in real time. So number 4, there's a need for better frontline nutritional assessment using low cost rapid tests, for example, micronutrient inflammatory markers. So last, of course, integration of the point 4 on the frontline nutritional assessment into nutritional surveillance with COVID-19 screening and contact tracing will be very important. So last but not least, I would like to thank Professor M1, Professor Nipa, Professor Patani as the lead of this project, and also Indonesian team from many different sectors and the Philippines teams. I would like to thank and offer to Professor M1. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rina, and those are very important information. So the data is really important. So now, next speaker would be Dr. Patani Vinijakun, Associate Professor from the Institute of Nutrition at Mahidol University. And Dr. Patani will share with us the highlights from the analysis and reflection on community-based intervention. Dr. Patani, you have the floor.
Oops. Right. Sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And thank you very much, Imran, for the introduction. Today, I'm going to highlight on my long presentation on community-based intervention to address multiple burdens of malnutrition in Southeast Asia, what works and what are required. I will begin with my attempt to understand what was done as community-based actions in addressing maternal and child nutrition. And I picked 3 countries in the region which have implemented a large-scale or national-scale programs. First, Indonesia, we'll look at the village-level volunteers and system there, which is go by the local name of Kaders and Posyandu, which is a village health post. Then for Vietnam, I looked at the VAC system, which is an agriculture-based system with nutrition objectives included as a goal. And then Thailand, through the community-based multi-sectoral approach under the National Poverty Alleviation Plan. By implementing all those programs in these countries, there were significant reduction in undernutrition, specifically on stunting in Vietnam and Thailand, and to some extent in Indonesia. However, wasting remains a public health problem in both Indonesia and Thailand. And in the meantime, it was observed that underfed, overweight, and obesity, it was rising in all three countries. So what are the lessons we learned from these experiences? First, the policy and planning and resource allocation need to be aligned of national policy and community and focus on reducing poverty and maternal and child undernutrition. Secondly, on the management coordination mechanism, especially at the community level, is crucial in order to have the community governance structure as what we saw in Thailand and Indonesia, in order to help mobilizing the community manpower and resources and provide the platform for effective multi-sectoral actions at the community level. The capacity development and resource mobilization through training, and of course, very crucial is the follow-up supervision, technical support, and community financing scheme, all aimed at sustainability and resilience. And finally, the operational research and knowledge management to provide appropriate tools and technologies such as the growth chart, which has been used in probably all countries, and also the example of basic minimum needs social indicators, which were used in Thailand successfully. All these were built on the community experiences and local wisdom. So where we are and where we are heading here. First, countries in the region are at different stages of social and economic development, with rapid transition in terms of diet, lifestyle, urbanization, digital technology, social media. Meanwhile, it is recognized now that malnutrition becomes more complex. Therefore, the community actions need a different form. But what are the opportunities then? If we look at this region, the traditional diets, which are plant-based, low energy density, with diverse ingredients, including spices and herbs. The community actions already exist in many countries, whether at the national or some subnational scale, such as primary healthcare in Thailand, Indonesia, the VAC agricultural system in Vietnam. The food production in most countries in the region are agricultural based and are also the major food producer and exporter with robust marketing and trade. In terms of the health service system, the countries in ASEAN recently actually agreed to put effort together to implement the universal health coverage, where actually there have been success in a few countries already. So in order to address this complex problem of multiple burden of malnutrition, what will be required then? In the health system, with the first 1,000-day policy and implementation, it is quite important to emphasize or make it explicit that this must be used to address both extremes of malnutrition. Many countries can capitalize on primary health care and find a way through the universal health coverage as well to mobilize the community and linking to the health system for NCD risk prevention and management. In terms of the food system, agriculture and food production need to focus on diversified food to be produced, as well as be aware of the safety issue, introducing smart farming, while continue to empower small farmers and women. What is important is to reset the targets and goals. Although it had been addressing the issue of food security, maybe nutrition objective is implicit. So this need to make it explicit for food production in the food system to produce healthy diets for all. In terms of the food environment, we need to have the roles of the legislation and regulatory system, as well as some taxing policy, not only to control on the standard of food, but also to curb unhealthy diets. It's also the opportunity to creating a healthy food environment in specific settings such as school, workplace, and the community. On the social safety net and public education, certainly the countries in the region still face the challenges of socio-economic problems. So the affordability and accessibility for healthy diets need to be addressed. As well, the non-nutrition actions such as physical activities and any other related public awareness campaign must be continued. And lastly, on the innovation, I think we are at the time of digital era. How to mobilize or how to utilize a digital platform to support the data-driven actions, to strengthen the integration across sectors, and to enforce the interaction across all levels, sectors, and linking the community to various systems. And finally, the government policy framework really have to provide the support to help connecting the system of health, food, environment, and for healthy and sustainable diet through to influence market trade, to facilitate partnership and strengthen socio-economic development, as well as to ensure the budget allocation are streamlined to support the multi-sectoral activities, especially at the community level. With that, I end my presentation and thank you for your attention. Over to you, Emon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patani. So now we have heard the lead presentation. So the burden is huge. The data is key to guide action, and community-based programs still have a potential. So we will now go to the panelists to get their views about how do we see ASEAN moving into the future. So I would like to start with Dr. Sutayut Osornprasop, Senior Human Development Specialist, Global Practice on Health, Nutrition, and Population in the World Bank. My question to you is that the ASEAN is so robust in its economic and marketing and trade. The issue is ASEAN did put their people in the core, as the core of their strategy. So how do you see the potential for this region to invest in human capital? And what do you think has to change for us to go forward? Over to you, Dr. Sutayut.
Yes, how about that? Perfect. Thank you very much. So thanks a lot, Professor Emon and the organizer, and I'm very pleased to be invited to participate in the Micronutrient Forum, 5th Global Conference. And to answer Professor Emon's questions, I have prepared presentations to show the linkage on the investment in nutrition and human capital development and the economy. And we see that to show the linkage, how important the nutrition will enhance the country's economies and human capital development in Southeast Asia. I would like to share that the World Bank, we actually, our work focus on two goals. We call it twin goals. The first goal is to end extreme poverty by 2030. And the second goal is to boost shared prosperity among the bottom 40% of the country. And there is a very good evidence on why nutrition is very important to addressing ending extreme poverty, shared prosperity, and hence the economy. According to the chief economist of the World Bank, there has been an analysis done that in the region of South Asia would have GDP per capita 10% greater than what they do today if they had eliminated chronic malnutrition when today's workers were children. So this is very clear on the calculations and the concrete quantitative evidence on the linkage between the GDP growth and nutrition. And if we look at the figure globally, that would be 7%. So you can see that if the children across the world today actually do not have any chronic malnutrition, the world's GDP would be 7% greater than today. So that shows how important nutrition is to the overall economies in the world. And how nutrition in the context of the World Bank Twin Goals, I would like to also expand it to the world. How it helped reduce poverty. We can see that improved nutrition improves the incomes and drives economic growth and hence reducing poverty. And also improving nutrition addresses the bottom 40% of the society who are the people that are affected mostly by chronic malnutrition. And this is very important for us to remember that for chronic malnutrition, it affects the poorer part of the society more. And next slide, I would like to share that the World Bank has developed a human capital index to demonstrate how human capital, how different aspects of human capital would contribute to the economic growth. And the key questions that drives the development of the human capital index is that how much human capital will a child born today acquire by the end of the secondary school, given the risk to poor health and poor education that prevailed in the country where she was born. And there are three ingredients that reflect the building blocks of the next generation's human capital. So one is survival. Will children born today survive to school age? Second is school. How much school will they complete and how much will they learn? And the last one, very importantly, health and nutrition. Will they leave school in good health and nutrition and ready for further learning and work? So these are parts of, this slide shows the indicators that we use to calculate the human capital index. On survival, we have under 5 survival rate. Under school, we look at the expected years of school by age 18, the harmonized student test scores, as well as the quality adjusted years of expected schooling. And on health, we look at stunting as well as the adult survival rate. So schooling, how it is linked to nutrition. Well, how investment in nutrition actually help build the human capital. From the schooling side, the early nutrition programs can increase school completion by 1 year, according to the data. Earnings, the early nutrition programs can raise adult wages by 5 to 50% in many countries. Poverty, children who escape stunting are 33% more likely to also escape poverty as adults. And finally, the economy. Reductions in stunting can increase the GDP by 4 to 11% in Asia and Africa. Looking at ASEAN, as Professor M. Ont mentioned about, we would see that ASEAN is a region with diverse human capital status. We have the country that perform the best, like Singapore, and we have countries that doesn't perform that well at the bottom of the figure. And I have disaggregated the human capital status into different indicators that we mentioned. And here, let's have a look at nutrition. We can see that nutrition contribution to human capital is very critical, but the performance by different countries still vary, and there is a need to actually accelerate the focus to eliminate malnutrition in Southeast Asia, particularly the countries that are at the lower end of the ASEAN average. Just let me share a little bit about what the World Bank has working with governments in countries in Southeast Asia. And this is, of course, government programmed, but it shows how the governments can work together multi-sectorally to address nutrition. Just to give an example from 3 countries, the first Laos. So the Laos has a phased convergence multi-sector approach to reduce malnutrition, starting with when the work started with stunting rate of 33%. The phase 1 was to lay the institutional foundation for convergence for multi-sectoral interventions, as well as having visible and tangible results families in most vulnerable geographic areas. And the following 4 years coming to phase 2, looking at strengthening the institutions, scaling up the programs, increase the coverage, and phase 3, further expand the program coverage based on the evidence of the implementation. And very importantly, there is a goal that is set for the country. By 2025, the country is to reduce stunting to only 25%. In Myanmar, we look at both the demand side and supply side. Demand side, looking at incentives for women to support seeking health and nutrition services, consuming diverse foods during pregnancy, proper feeding, caring for children, improving quality of communication interventions. On the supply side, incentives and performance monitoring of health providers and community level workers to increase the coverage and quality of health and nutrition interventions for women and children during the first 1,000 days. And all of these are underpinned with system strengthening the accountability, monitoring, and evaluation. In Indonesia, it demonstrates that the whole of government approach for the national strategy to accelerate stunting prevention, looking at the existing operations in water sanitation, social protection, in health, the community development, and as well as the early childhood education project. So everything coming together to work and support nutrition. And very importantly, strengthen the evidence base. Evidence drives implementation and help convince policymakers, particularly the Ministry of Finance, that they should invest more on nutrition. So it's very important to generate data on child maternal dietary intake, nutrition status. We need to have rigorous analytics on the drivers and determinants of malnutrition with country-specific factors, generating investment cases on cases for not investing of nutrition, and the bottlenecks of service delivery, including financing pilots that can test innovative approaches for delivering evidence-based nutrition. And these are some of the examples that we have done, but I would like to go through it, and would like to thank the organizer once again, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sudhir. That is very helpful to know that, we have evidence for human capital investment in this region, as well as certain countries that's already pioneering and pushed forward incorporating nutrition into that program. Thank you for that. Now, to go from this, when the countries say, well, yes, Okay, we want to invest in human capital. Now, to nourish them, what are we going to need? This comes to the next panelist, and I would like to introduce Dr. Cecilia Acuin, Associate Professor at University of the Philippines at Los Baños, and Dr. Cecilia will address this in light of what food system and agriculture has a potential to nourish the human capital of ASEAN and deliver healthy and sustainable diet. This is the region where we do grow our own foods and export it. So let's hear from you. Over to you, Cecilia. Oh, well, uh, yes. So what we can do, Dr. Cecilia is trying to work out the technical issue. So why don't we go to the next panelist, and Dr. Roland Kupka. Dr. Roland Kupka is the Regional Nutrition Advisor at UNICEF East Asia and Pacific region. Now, my question to you is that it is quite important that we reach the vulnerables and the poorest of the poor group, particularly with nutrition, because they are so at risk. With the COVID-19, make things worse for them. So how do you see the social protection program in ASEAN can address this, and what is the way forward? Over to you, Roland.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Emor, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel. And I had a chance to anticipate your question, and I've divided my answer into 3 parts. First, I'd like to talk about the key features of current social protection programs in the region. Those programs are, of course, programs that cover the policies and other interventions to reduce the far-reaching consequences of poverty and inclusion. And programs like cash transfers, for instance, really present an opportunity to connect families with healthcare, with nutritious food, with quality education, so that all children have indeed a fair chance in life. However, the data is showing that 2 out of 3 children worldwide are not covered by any form of social protection, leaving them vulnerable to economic hardships and social inclusion. When we look at data from the region, we also see that countries in this region have historically spent far less on social protection measures than the global average. However, what we've seen in recent years is that there is a steady expansion of these programs, and as a result, these programs are a valuable opportunity to improve the nutrition of poor and at-risk households, including of young children. To just perhaps cite a few of these programs, we have the Maternal and Child Cash Transfer Program in Myanmar and Cambodia, the 4Ps program in the Philippines, as well as the Thailand Child Support Grant for young children. As I've mentioned, these programs promise to improve dietary and nutritional choices, caring practices, as well as health care seeking behaviors. Last year, we at UNICEF, our FAO colleagues, had a chance to actually do a stock take of existing social protection programs in East Asia Pacific. And we found that there is a general lack of robust impact assessments of these social protection programs, including cash transfer programs, and that there's even less data on the effect of the nutritional outcomes of these programs. However, there are some really promising exceptions, and one is the Child Support Grant in Thailand, which has just undergone a very sophisticated impact evaluation, and which demonstrated that this support grant targeted to vulnerable families with young children produced important nutritional impacts, including improvements in feeding practices and reductions in the incidence of wasting. The availability of such data has been highlighted as a success factor in Thailand for sustaining and expanding this program. I do think that this is a big lesson for other countries as well, that such data is needed to improve and expand these programs. Secondly, I've been asked to reflect a little bit on some of the required actions to improve the nutritional benefits of social protection programs in the region. In the context of last year's State of Food Security and Nutrition report, we and other colleagues had a chance to look at this data. I do recommend those of you who are interested in this topic taking a look at this report. And what was concluded was that with regard to the design of these programs, data shows that increases in household income do not automatically result in improved diets and nutrition of children. And therefore, a key recommendation is to better leverage these programs and to connect households with vital nutrition services. What we've also seen is that those programs can serve as a platform to deliver other nutrition-specific interventions, such as fortified staple foods. When it comes to the targeting and program eligibility, there are also some key lessons for the region. For instance, that we need to do a much better job to consider the treatment for severe forms of wasting into programs such as the health insurance laws in different countries. Of course, any program should have a strong gender focus as well to empower women. And this links back to my previous point, we need to very much increase the evidence base to guide the scale up, the expansion of these programs. And there are perhaps some lessons to be learned from the African continent, where harmonized regional evaluation programs have been of great benefit. Lastly, and this links a little bit to Dr. Suteyut's presentation as well, I feel we as nutritionists also need to become much more involved in public financing discussions on nutrition. On the UNICEF side, we've been fortunate to be able to produce actually a specific course on that for nutritionists, public financing for nutrition, and that we're going to be rolling out next year, and we hope that will be of use. Lastly, I was then asked to reflect a little bit on potential adjustments that are needed in the context of COVID, and there I'm sure we are all aware of the far-reaching consequences of COVID, which, for instance, may lead to 150 million additional children falling into poverty in low and middle income countries. We also know that because of COVID, most economies in East Asia, Pacific and beyond are expected to contract, or growth will be significantly slowed down, and which is likely going to reduce domestic resources for nutrition, health, and other social sectors. But one thing we've really learned in the context of the pandemic is that very rapid transformations are indeed possible. So with regard to social protection program, we've seen that new avenues have opened up, both by demonstrating their affordability, their potential to mitigate broad-based risks, and to tackle some of the structural drivers that we're struggling with. As a result, we've seen actually in the region a rapid recent expansion of these social protection programs. Overall, 190 countries, I understand, have implemented, adapted, or planned these programs around the world. And just to cite some examples from the region, in Thailand, again, the program was successfully expanded to reach more than 1.2 million beneficiaries with an additional grant on the order of $30 per month for a period of 3 months. In Myanmar, also, we've seen a vast expansion of the maternal and child cash transfer program. We've also seen that many other countries have been able to protect the provision of nutrition services in the context of school closures. And other countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, have been able to integrate nutrition interventions in the back-to-school efforts. So overall, and this is my last point, I think that the rapid expansion of social protection programs in East Asia and beyond offers a great opportunity for us as the nutrition community. But we need to get ready to engage in those discussions. We need to equip ourselves, to engage in discussions on the design, the targeting, the implementation, and the monitoring. And I do hope that we will be able to seize this opportunity as a community. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Dr. Emorn.
Thank you very much, Roland, for that very, very valid point. And this is the time and opportunity where social protection and nutrition could really join forces. And I think that there are more opportunities to demonstrate how that would really impact the vulnerables as well. So thank you very much for that. I understand Dr. Cecilia is not yet ready. So I would then like to thank you very much, Roland. And so I'm going to go to the next panelist, Dr. Purnima Menon, who's a senior research fellow from International Food Policy Research Institute in South Asia office in New Delhi. The importance of data, we have heard. Data is power. How do you see the potentials for data system to lead the way, particularly for decision making in policy and program in ASEAN? So, well, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. So over to you, Purnima.
Thank you so much, Imon. It's an absolute pleasure to have to be here today. So thank you for the invitation, but also a great pleasure to have been involved in this journey of examining the policy data across the Southeast Asian countries, connecting it with our own experiences in South Asia. So to anchor my remarks today, I thought it would be nice to quickly share with you what we had been doing in South Asia and offer some suggestions based on that for maybe some further consolidation around the data issue, especially in Southeast Asia. So one of the things that we have done in South Asia is to take a look at all of the recommended nutrition actions that are laid out in the global evidence base. So we use the essential nutrition actions across the life course as a base and added into it a few others. And what you realize when you do that is that you actually have a range of different nutrition actions just even across the first 1,000 days. What we then did was we reviewed the policy and program documents and the data systems in each of the countries, mapping those very precisely to these essential nutrition actions. So we were looking at it in a very specific way, basically to say, when you have an evidence-based action that's recommended, is it applicable to the country in question? So is that an action that's actually country? And if it's relevant, is it available in their policy and program framework? And if it's available in the policy and program framework, do you have data available on those actions in the country data systems to be able to track progress? And let me just show you what we found when we did this for the 8 South Asian countries. So this is the 8 countries down here: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. So what we found is that if you take that long list of nutrition actions, you have about 50 odd actions. The gray bars in this graph are simply which ones are even applicable to the country context, because several actions are only sort of relevant if you have have a particular challenge. The orange dot in each of these bars is whether the country policy addresses an action that should be there based on the country context. The blue dot is whether there is actually a program. So you have a policy, you actually have a program, but then, you go all the way down that gray bar, and the dark blue dot is whether there is data available to track progress. So what you see from this analysis that we've done across the region is that there is actually a very high degree of policy completeness across the region. But when you see how big that gap is between the blue dot and the dark blue dot that I've signaled, you see a very huge gap there in terms of the availability of data. And that's something that we should all be very concerned about, because in fact, if you had that available data, this is the kind of regional analysis you could do. You could take a look at all of the key actions for which you have data and then lay them out across all of the different countries and over time. So we've done this for a subset here, and be able to see where all countries were doing well, which countries needed to invest more in which areas, but you also get to see data gaps. So I think, when I kind of reflect on what are the key takeaways from the way in which we approach that work in South Asia, and what does that possibly imply for the kind of work that this amazing group is doing on Southeast Asia? I think trying to do sort of the comparative analysis, deepen the comparative analysis, so that we get a view both on policy completeness and coherence and data adequacy can be very, very useful in this new context of changing nutrition needs. And in a sense, not just using the data available to track progress, but actually tracking the data that is available on regional nutrition priorities. That can really help create an important dialogue on closing data gaps, on financing data systems, and on tracking progress. Now, the kind of slide that I showed you previously, which is the dashboards of the analysis of existing data, but that can only be helpful because we are able to use available data. But if we don't actually track the data that's available, we will never be able to make the right kinds of in strengthening the data systems. So I think, I just want to close by saying that I think what we've seen with this session and the work that, has been shared by the three speakers is that there is a changing context around malnutrition priority in the Southeast Asia region, extending that to say, to the actions that need to be in place and then to a review of the existing data systems can really help because we're going to need to track progress on a lot more than just what is available to us right now through standard data systems. So what's available through standard data systems is likely to be very inadequate. Southeast Asia has shown us the way, or shown the world the way on reducing undernutrition and the use of data and other such things related to that. I think you're now in an amazing position to show the way in terms of what is it that we would need to do to track progress on the actions that relate to the new set of nutrition challenges. So that's all I really wanted to stop with over there. I would love to answer more questions later on, share more insights from our South Asia work. But I would really strongly encourage this approach of taking common action framework and then just putting together the regional review work and the data availability work around that so that data gaps can be much more we'll be able to see it much more strongly and then be able to advocate for strengthening data systems and data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is a very, very valuable contribution from South Asia. Now we are back to, we're glad Dr. Cecilia is back with us. So Cecilia, the question I do have for you is that because human capital is important to ASEAN. ASEAN put their people in the core of that strategy. Now, if we're going to nourish them with what is going to be, and that looks to us is the food system and agriculture. This is where the region that you have robust in terms of production and export of food. So please give us some idea as to what needs to happen and the way forward. Over to you.
Okay, let's do this. Share. All right. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I'd like to thank the organizers of the Micronutrient Forum for organizing this session on the Southeast Asia region and for inviting me to join this wonderful panel and set of speakers. So, my task is to talk about the food systems and agriculture linkage with nutrition in our region. And I'd like to start by showing you this ranking of the Global Food Security Index of the different countries of our region to illustrate how diverse our region is. So this is the global ranking, mind you, not the regional ranking. So Singapore is at the top of the ranking globally. So they are number one in terms of almost all the different parameters that went into this index. And as you go down through the different countries of our region, you can see how varied the scores are. And roughly, you might say that we can group the countries roughly into three, where you have those with very high food security, like Singapore, or the Malaysia and Thailand, and maybe to some extent Vietnam. And then you would have countries in the middle like Indonesia, the Philippines, and then you have a set of countries at the bottom like Myanmar, or that are still struggling with food security like Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. Now, in putting together this index, I show you two examples of the different parameters that went into that index. One is the volatility of agricultural production, and the other one is the dietary availability of different micronutrients in the food system of those different countries. Unfortunately, the Global Food Security Index does not allow disaggregation for Southeast Asia, but it does allow it for Asia Pacific. So maybe that relates a little to what Purnima's experience also has been, because India is part of that. So you can see from the volatility of agricultural production that our region is fairly stable in terms of volatility compared to other regions or other continents of the globe. Which is probably because we have a fairly stable peace and order situation. We have a fairly diverse agricultural profile. We trade openly and freely. Well, not that free, but among each other, we trade that freely, and we trade also with the rest of the world. So there are not a lot of barriers, I think, in terms of our agricultural production. And Emorn has pointed out earlier that we do export a substantial amount of food and food products globally. However, if you look at the dietary availability of micronutrients, you will see that Asia Pacific doesn't fare very well. That what is available in what we eat are for at least for vitamin A, iron, and zinc, it's not very high. In fact, for iron and zinc, it's quite low. So we do produce, but maybe we are not consuming the right things in the right way. So that may be why in the earlier presentations from Rina and from Julia, we saw that there is a lot of micronutrient deficiency. There is a lot of even food insecurity and undernourishment. But at the same time, we are experiencing increasing overweight and obesity in our region. So the links between agriculture and nutrition, while they may seem implicit or obvious at the individual and maybe at the household level, and to some extent at the community level. Once you get to the country level and the regional level, these links between agriculture and nutrition are not that explicit. So in order to share some of my thoughts about this, I thought of using this food systems framework, which was put together by the high level panel of experts of FAO early this year before COVID struck. But in the interest of time, I will only be able to talk about really the food production part and our food supply chains. And it is very ironic because you saw from the previous slide that Singapore has very high food security, but when you look at the resilience, it is not that high. The country doesn't fare that high because they import almost all of their food. So more than 90% of the food consumed in Singapore is imported, which means that they are very vulnerable to trade fluctuations and they are very dependent on the production of other countries in our region and around the world. Such is not the case for the other countries that have higher food production and are able to produce more of what their people need and are able to even export. So examples of that in our region would be Thailand and Vietnam, and now to some extent Myanmar and Indonesia. So this food production diversity in the way or in our food production systems um, is really brings us to some of the things that M1 pointed out. What are the things that we need to change, or what are the things that we could improve in the region? And I put there as the first one as energy sufficiency and food security. Although we produce a lot of energy giving foods, rice, for example, um, we we do not combine the rice with a diversified diet. And so, in order for us to be resilient in terms of our food supply, we really need to have a more diversified food production system. In nutrition, we measure diet diversity as a measure of a good nutritious diet, but we cannot have diet diversity unless we have crop and food production diversification. So that is, I think, one of the challenges for our region. Food security. Our region is fairly food secure compared to other regions, but the problem is the inequity in the distribution systems. So that is beyond the scope of my talk. But one of the ways that we are dealing with this in our region would be through plant breeding, improvements in our food technology to make our food supply to make our food supply to increase our food supply or maintain it, despite the fact that our land use and our manpower is not increasing further. And also, and I think this links to Patani's earlier presentation about communities, is that there is still a lot of reliance on local food systems. This is good on the one hand because that means that our rural communities have probably a lot of resilience among them, but it is not that good when you think about, for example, what happened in the COVID situation, where the produce from one part of the country or one part of the region was not reaching other parts. So when local food systems are not enough to deliver on a diversified diet, then we run into problems when the supply chains are disrupted. So the next thing that we could improve would be our nutrient adequacy. And here, this links to the earlier point I raised about plant breeding and food technology, that there are a lot of efforts for biofortification and food fortification that are going on in the region. And although this has not, especially for biofortification, has not been I think, expanded sufficiently in order to benefit the ones who need it most. I think we are getting there. But we do need to work on the systems so that these kinds of the promise of these kinds of technology will really reach our, especially the ones who are marginalized within our region. I've talked about diet diversity and food access, and the problems really are more with the access and distribution. As I said, Singapore has very high diet diversity, but this is because they are able to make their food affordable and available to most people in their city state. That is not the case for all our countries. We have a lot of food produced, but we are not they're not reaching our peoples in the same way. And then the third point that I would like to see changed in our region is really the point about having safe, healthy, and sustainable diets. Um, and here it is the mindset of, we're having quality um, take precedence over quantity. For many, many decades, our agricultural systems have focused on just increasing production, regardless of the quality, regardless of whether we are able to process these foods in a way that will make them safe for consumption, that will keep the uh, keep the nutrients intact during the food processing. And I think that has to change. And for that to change, it's not enough that we have strong nutrition systems within each country or strong nutrition policies within each country. We trade so much across the region that we also need to have an ASEAN, I think, an ASEAN policy about these kinds of things. Finally, I I uh, I I thought I would go to the other end of this framework because it really needs to reach people for all of these different changes and innovations to make a difference in terms of nutrition. And I have to agree with Patani that community actions are the way to get these innovations to people.
Mm.
But communities have changed. A lot of our population are now in urban centers. And so
Mhm.
the ways that our communities need to work together to organize, to get safe, healthy, sustainable, nutritious diets to everybody have to change from previous efforts of just coming together and then bringing common produce or foods to the market. We have to
Mhm.
get our systems to a more to be better organized in the face of urban changes. So I think I will stop there. Thank you, Emorn.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you. It is important indeed that we have, you know, the effective food system, particularly if we want to feed all those um, people that we feel are the target population that needs to improve. And it is a complex, it is a complex one. But I have to say that I have learned a lot from all the panelists, and that we seems to be coming from different angles. But at the end of that, we are primarily in agreement in a few ways that it is important to invest in nutrition, that it is important that we do right with data and evidence, because everybody seems to go forward. So I would like to do some, we are running into time um, constraint a bit, but we have some questions. So I'm just going to go for select a few of them. I think this is for Julia. This is from Augustine F. What he asked was that the first two presenters emphasized the importance of collecting more data and better data system. Could you talk to what the countries have done to improve their data and information system for nutrition and some of the challenges they are facing. Julia,
Thank you so much, Dr. Emon. Yeah, in terms of the data, it's like, Dr. Purnima has also already mentioned, in terms of the ASEAN, well, when I try to analyze the data from this 10 country, basically we realize it that the data is like, a lot of data are missing. As you see in one of the slides, there were like gray bar, which is like, basically there is just no data. And when the country has the data, some is like, the quality of data, it might not be always there in every country. Just an example, when we would like to analyze the data on the low birth weight, many of the, some of the developing country actually even not record the birth weight of the infant when they are born. So when we got the data, that data might not be really reflected the real situation. So country has been investing a lot in terms of like trying to improve the data as well as like, to do more frequent, but still like the gaps, especially like for the micronutrient, many of like, because that might need, the micronutrient status might need blood, like, this is not very cheap survey. So it's still, there are a lot of things need to be done and to be improved in terms of the quality as well as quantity. So there has been considerable progress in terms of like the data, but still need to be improved a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next the question I have here, which I think need to be addressed, come from Marie R. I think this is Marie Ruel. She asked, this session is about addressing all forms of malnutrition, but very little has been mentioned of how to tackle different forms of malnutrition at the same time through programs and policies. Could the speakers please reflect on their experience in addressing problems of undernutrition and preventing overweight and obesity, or at least to ensure that their undernutrition focused programs and policies do no harm in terms of increasing present and future risk of overweight, obesity, and risk of NCD. Rina or Dr. Patani, which one? Rina, would you like to take this one?
Okay, thank you, Professor Emont. It might be not so much that I could share now, but in my perspective, the most important one is the country has a high commitment to solve the problem. That's actually what we can also learn from the case study from these three countries. And but most of the country, especially Indonesia, for example, also maybe Philippines and Thailand, focusing more on stunting rather than really putting priority on the obesity. So the obesity program or reduction was not part of the priority. So this is something that need to be emphasized for the next strategy for countries that facing the double burden, which actually they face also double duty. And the third one, if it's so, usually the country are not very much putting investment on the healthy eating or the food system, but very much on the individual health program, which is separate from the other sectors. So multi-sectors approach altogether in overcoming these two burden or multiple burden at the same time will be important. So I think investing on the food system transformation, and of course also related to data investment of digital platform, especially on integrating the advancement or training for the frontline health workers to really gather a good data, quality data will be very important, and link that to the universal health coverage And in universal health coverage, we know that the most important aspect that we always miss, the missing middle person who actually not sick, and also the vulnerable group are not being enrolled on the universal health coverage, are actually very important to highlight, because they are not sick, and they should be the one which actually can be prevented from the overweight, obesity, and perhaps also non-communicable disease. So integration of this program will be challenges, of course, and the country needs to increase the health expenditure budget, especially also to put more emphasis on promoting preventive action, health expenditure. I think that's what I can explain, Prof.
Okay.
Yeah, can I add to that? I think from the field, it seems like the perception or separate perception about undernutrition being the problems of mothers and children, whereas the obesity is a problem of older children and adults, are still there. And I think we need to repackage somehow. For example, the first 1,000 days, people, I mean, the personnel and probably the community realize that they need to uh, support or improving the nutrition of these people. But when it comes to the actions, most of the time people still asking what's new. And it's clear that the NCD, I mean, the risk of NCD starts from that early life hasn't been emphasized adequately in the program. So I think we need to either reorient it or repackage somehow, even on the activities which have already been implemented for a long time successfully. We need to chip it a little bit so that it is included. And at the same time, certainly as Rina commented, that we need to do more on the other age group, maybe especially on the preventive side. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. Thank you very much for Panima. Panima, this is from Shantanu S. Would you advocate for micronutrient powder supplementation over IFA, iron folic acid, or calcium tablets for pregnant women in India, considering the poor consumption of IFA tablets as well as increasing burden of anemia in the country?
I guess maybe it was a question coming from the review. I think I don't feel like it's my position to sort of advocate for anything one or the other. Those decisions are made by sort of policy committees and communities of various stakeholders in India. And in fact, there is a very robust anemia Center for Excellence working on anemia, which is reviewing all kinds of sort of policies and what the intervention should be now. And I think part of the discussions you're having will also be around multiple micronutrients. I assume that's what you meant. The insights on, the data tells us a lot. It does indeed about the limited consumption and uptake of some of the micronutrient supplements. And, what I would sort of like to say based on, what I shared here today is that regardless of, where we want to take this, it's quite important that people look at the data on, okay, what is going on with iron supplementation today? What is it that the data on coverage and reach and uptake can tell us? And how would that then inform, the introduction of any other commodity into the system? And so, the choice of whether to introduce multiple micronutrient supplements, whether to introduce multiple micronutrient powders, those are a set of policy decisions. What I wanted to share today is simply that regardless of which commodity you introduce into these programs, actually examining, making sure you have data to track coverage is going to be really important, and actually digging into that to analyze it, to understand what that's telling you about patterns, trends, inequities, etc., can help inform us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we are running quite a bit into the end of the session. So I can do one more, and that one is for Lauren. And do we have a model for integration of nutrition with social protection that can be replicated? I hope it's a yes or no. So we can.
I mean, work has been done, as I was trying to cite. A number of countries are seeing success. I'm not aware of an overall generic tool on this, but I do think, as I tried to outline my contribution, that this is a really, really important area for us as nutritionists, and it's very important that we take a look at how we support our colleagues so that we can seize those opportunities. On the UNICEF side, we've just put in place some measures along those lines, but I do think that a lot more work is indeed needed.
Okay, thank you. I think this question, there are one more question which I don't know who can answer, but it looks to me like this is a very good one for any of the speaker or panel too. This has to do with the question is from Augustine F. Building on Marie's question, which is like, it's a trade-off. How do we address both or forms together without doing no harm to one? So, but he want to specifically focusing on addressing wasting together with other forms of malnutrition. Wasting numbers remain quite high compared to stunting trends. Do speakers have insights about successful wasting prevention efforts in the region? And to what extent were these interventions also addressing other forms of malnutrition? I think that Rina has already said it seems like it's a separate efforts, but anyone would like to add to that one?
Maybe I can add a little bit.
Yes, please, Julia.
Yes, indeed. Like, in the past, based on our review, it show actually like in most of the program is like very silo, in which like, under nutrition focus more on the wasting, and then the other one is like, obesity is not included. One of the possible option is like, for example, the growth monitoring. At the moment, it measure like between like, wasting as well as like overweight and obesity using the same chart. However, most of the country currently only focus on the undernutrition or wasting. When they found the child is wasted, like, then there is like a mechanism or procedure or clinical, referral that is exists. But when the child was measured and it show like obese, there is nothing happening at the moment. So this is one of the possible opportunity that we can embed it, like, obesity into the same program, that measurement, and then also as part of the counseling, and then also the counseling of the breastfeeding and the growth monitoring, it can be embedded without harming one or the other. At the moment, we are supporting Cambodia, for example. So as part of their national guideline for growth monitoring and promotion, it's also include the obesity in addition to undernutrition or identification of wasting and treatment of wasting. Over.
Okay, thank you. So we have one question for Patani from Keith W. I think that's Keith West. Thank you for your presentation. From your work in Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam, are there research priorities that have arisen within communities aimed at improving quality and diversity of diets of mothers, children, or older persons? He's asking about research priorities in the communities for that.
Well,
Dr. Patani?
I think what has been happening actually also the changing diet. And although we thought that the community, generally speaking, can produce their own foods, but I think we can't stop the fact that many of the processed foods or other, unhealthy snacks, for example, have actually intruded in the community at a very rapid rate. And I think we still have a lot to do in terms of, even from the traditional diet point of view, we have to deal a lot with the like what's the so-called street food or the small vendors, which tend to provide ready cooked food, which is very common even in the communities in the rural areas and elsewhere. So I think some of this work in the past have only looked at probably more on the food safety side, but not really on the quality of the uh, diet per se. And I think this really needs a lot more work to understand how it's been changing and who actually influence the way that the foods are prepared and so on. So it's no longer in the traditional sense in that people cook at home any longer. So I think it's really one aspect that I think would be very useful to look at, and probably particularly in Southeast Asia, which seemed to be the case. I hope I answers part of it, but yeah, if others want to
Yeah.
input that.
Keith
thank
can
you.
write to you. Okay. The last questions I have on here has to do with are there any models or case studies of digital data collection at the community level used by frontline workers that has taken into account multi-sectoral data needs? By Manita J. Digital data collection at the community level by frontline workers. Rina or Dr. Patani, you know of any?
Not that I'm aware of. Like in Thailand, I think we have sort of a good, interesting health data system at the moment, but I don't think that is fed in the system by the community people. It's really data are sent to the health personnel at the peripheral level, and they are the ones who enter the data and send up through the system electronically instead of the paper reporting as was done in the past. But I have not really looked into that in other countries. Over.
Yeah, I would like to share a little bit, Professor Emon.
Okay.
Actually, yeah,
We have 1 minute to go.
WHO already have introduced the Open Smart Register platform, Open SRP, and this is actually some countries already applied that, including Indonesia. And we actually have now actually very much initiated by NGO like Summit Institute for Development. They deploy this in midwife through the tablets, which actually work together with the vaccinator and also nutritionists and also the nurses to look at the pregnant mothers' data. And when they have actually initiated any antenatal care and has a problem, any other sectors, not only midwife, can work together in action. So this real-time data from Open SRP coming from the community can actually raise action enable agenda really from the frontline health workers. So the action to the mothers to prevent them from the severe problem will be important in this aspect. Yeah.
And more?
Yes, please.
30 seconds. Just a very quick experience from the Philippines, and this is very recent from the time of this pandemic. UNICEF has been trying to find out if the families can measure the mid-upper arm circumference of children themselves and then relay that information by cell phone. To check.
Okay.
So this is
Okay,
not
that's
strictly
good.
speaking a digital system, but it is one way of trying to find out what's going on when health workers themselves cannot go to the communities because of pandemic restrictions. So We are in fact going to discuss this particular study that UNICEF is conducting in about 2 weeks' time. But I think that this is one of the ways we will have to go in order to get the communities and the families more empowered about their own nutritional status. So it's not just depending on others to do the measurements for them, and then
Okay.
depending on others to get the interventions to them.
That's a good
I'll
thing.
stop there. Okay.
Thank you very much. So I think that those are very, very good. And Dr. Sutayura, I'm so sorry. I just saw your notes because I was on a different screen about you want to share some of the perspectives. So I will give you, 1 minute warp speed.
Well,
Please.
thank you very much. I actually just want to add to what Dr. Patani and also Renat mentioned, respond to the questions in the context of the countries that have both undernutrition and overnutrition. What are the key interventions that the countries would be needed? And I think that we know very well how to respond. Interventions for addressing undernutrition is very clear, but for overnutrition, we need additional interventions like how to improve nutrition information by regulating the food market, improving the food labeling, particularly the front of pack labeling, and scaling up the nutrition education. I would also say that the taxation policy and subsidies can also be important interventions, and we need to engage the Ministry of Finance in doing so. It has been proved the SSB tax, the tax on sugar-sweetened beverage, has actually resulted in the reduction in the consumption, and this can also be extended to salt as well as to sugar added food as well. And I would like to share that there are certain aspects that the countries that actually have food insecurity issues and overweight issues may need to contemplate. For example, there have been subsidies for rice and cereals that result in a low cost for the starchy staple foods and edible oils. And so this could actually contribute to pervasive availability of these processed, energy-dense and micronutrient-poor foods compared to the relatively high cost of the whole grains, fruits, vegetables, or low-fat animal source foods in the country. So this is something that the food policy in these countries can be rebalanced to not only address the distortions created by the policies to favor staple grains, but also incentivize the diversification of the food production. Input subsidies, public agriculture advisory services, and irrigation investments must not create obstacles to farmers aiming to diversify production and specialize in higher value and nutrient-dense foods. And there is also a need to rethink food-based safety nets. So not focusing on giving food that are actually high in calories, but diverse food that can be given. So these are some of the aspects that I would like to share to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are very helpful and very, very true. So I have this undaunting task of trying to summarize everything, which is, and we are already walking to the break time. But I have asked for a couple of minutes, and I would like to first say that this has been very, very rich session, and we have learned quite a bit of. We know now, Southeast Asia, the malnutrition problem, we are off track on the progress, but we have potential. There are certain policies and there are certain programs which address the double duty that we could bring on board. We can strengthen the 1,000 days. There's also community-based action. There's also social protection where nutrition can be incorporated. There are opportunities that we can say human capital investment cannot be compromised, that we need to compete on the priority with the COVID-19 coming on board. A lot of money is going somewhere else. They have to help people who are cannot find jobs. What we need to fight for is why do we need those money to help the target group, the poorest of the poorest, the vulnerables, because if they're sliding down malnutrition track, it will take us years after to bring up that. There's also another point of coin that I think is very good to come in from the question is to do no harm. In order for the program to be able to address both sides of the coin, we have to be careful that we do not jeopardize one for trade-offs for the other. And this is where lots of time at this point, the program are still focused on one, does not yet embrace the other. So we really have to take a look at what we can learn. And some of those programs, as you have said, for food policy on diversification of the diet that Dr. Sutayut had just said, I think I really am in agreement. The taxation and those is that we have to take a look at the more holistic picture. At the end of the day, what we want the consumer to have is a balanced diet and healthy foods that are available, accessible, and affordable. And so to reach that goals, we have to not go one way or another. And that means the whole system approach, we have to line up and say where in that line there is a leverage of things that need to be done and to be fixed. The things that we have learned about data is that nearly everyone who speak today talk about the power of data. This Southeast Asia region is flooded with data, but it is not the right kind, not the right time. It's years ago. It's not real time. You cannot project anything or you cannot influence decision by something that you collect 10 years ago because the situation has already changed. And COVID-19 has made one more, is that the landscape of the post-COVID era is changing rapidly. If the data cannot keep up with that, how do we make the decision? So all these bases, data is power, but it has to be the right quality and the time that we would need. I think that I have to say that to apologize that I'm not able to bring every single information that the speakers and the panelists have put forth. But I think it is a start by saying we need to review, we need to take a look at what we have, and we need to look at what is needed. And this is important. Is Southeast Asia will have to look beyond Southeast Asia, to look at South Asia, to look at Africa, to look at other countries, Europe and others that has done some of the program or policy that we can share. The world can be connected. And the silo approach, even a country in isolation, cannot go well. You cannot solve all the problem by yourself. So here is an opening for this, is that we need to learn from others, and working together across discipline is not going to be so easy, or across sector, but we have to try. That's the way we can make progress. And thank you very much, all the speakers and all the panelists and those who help working behind the scene for questions, and also the technical team who helps making this possible. And thank you, the audience, for your attention and also your participation in question. Have a good time. There are more programs coming. I'd like to invite you to join the rest of the week and enjoy the Micronutrient Forum Global Conference. So with that, thank you very much. สวัสดีค่ะ